It started with a glance that lasted too long, my girlfriend's sister, standing there with a smile that felt both dangerous and irresistible. And when she leaned closer and whispered, "She'll never find out if you're careful," I realized I was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. I still remember the first evening I met her, not in the loud way you remember a dramatic moment, but in the quiet way a single glance can rearrange something inside you. I had gone to visit my girlfriend after work, expecting her to open the door, but instead, it was her sister who greeted me. The house was washed in the soft glow of a summer sunset, golden light filtering through sheer curtains, the air warm but carrying a faint trace of jasmine from the garden outside. She stood in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a tall glass vase, her movements unhurried, graceful, almost meditative. She looked up at me, strands of dark hair slipping from a loose bun and brushing across her cheek. "You're early," she said, her tone playfully teasing, though her smile carried a quiet composure that caught me off guard. I laughed lightly, setting my keys on the counter. Traffic wasn't as bad as I thought. For a moment, silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but heavy with awareness. I noticed details I shouldn't have paid attention to, the soft lines at the corner of her eyes that made her expression even warmer, the way her blouse, light lavender in color, seemed to carry the same scent as the flowers she was arranging. I told myself it was just respect, admiration even. But beneath it, a flicker of something else moved. She placed one final stem into the vase, and tilted her head as if to inspect her work. The curve of her lips deepened when she caught me watching. "Do you like them?" she asked, gesturing toward the bouquet. "Yeah," I replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "They look perfect." Her smile softened, and she turned back to adjust a petal. "Nothing's ever perfect. But sometimes, close is good enough." There was something in the way she said it that lingered with me, like she wasn't just talking about flowers. I shifted awkwardly, slipping my hands into my pockets, trying to focus on anything else. But the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint clink of glass as she adjusted the vase, even the rhythm of her breathing, it all felt magnified. When my girlfriend finally called from upstairs, breaking the spell, I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. She walked past me toward the stairs, her hand brushing lightly against my sleeve as she passed. It was casual, accidental, and yet my skin burned where her fingertips had grazed. I told myself it was nothing. A moment, an impression. Still, as I followed the sound of my girlfriend's voice, I couldn't shake the thought that something unspoken had begun in that sunlit kitchen, in the brief silence between two people who were never meant to look at each other that way. That evening, the house was full of voices, my girlfriend laughing with a friend on the couch, the television humming in the background, the clink of glasses and the occasional burst of chatter from the kitchen. It was the kind of noise that usually drowned out thought. Yet, somehow, I found myself tuning most of it out, my focus pulled again and again to one person. Her sister. She sat across the room, angled slightly toward the window, listening more than speaking. There was a kind of stillness about her, a quiet poise that didn't demand attention but somehow drew mine all the same. She wore a simple cream sweater, sleeves pushed up to her elbows, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Every so often, when the conversation struck her as amusing, her lips would curl into a subtle smile. Not the broad kind her younger sister often flashed, but something gentler, deeper, like the smile of someone who's seen enough of life to laugh softly instead of loudly. I told myself not to stare. But my eyes betrayed me. I noticed how she crossed her legs slowly, how she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, how she leaned forward just slightly when someone spoke to her. Nothing about her movements was deliberate, and maybe that's what made them magnetic. At one point, she stood to pour drinks for everyone. I offered to help, mostly as an excuse to be near her, though I pretended it was just politeness. In the kitchen, the room suddenly felt quieter, the laughter muffled by distance. She handed me a glass to pass along, her fingers grazing my palm. It was the lightest of touches, so quick it could have been dismissed as nothing at all. But in that instant, my skin seemed to awaken, my pulse jumping in a way I couldn't explain. Our eyes met. Just for a second. long enough for me to feel the weight of something neither of us dared name. She didn't look away quickly, but she didn't hold the gaze too long either. It was measured, intentional, like a word left unspoken on purpose. Back in the living room, I tried to focus on the conversation, but it was like trying to read with a candle flickering at the corner of your vision. You keep glancing back, distracted by the glow. She returned to her seat, folding her hands again, her face composed. But once, when her younger sister said something animated and silly, I caught her eyes flicking toward me, as if checking whether I found it as endearing as she did. I smiled without meaning to. And she smiled back, small, fleeting, but enough to make the room feel suddenly warmer. I told myself it was nothing. Just politeness. Just coincidence. But later that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying that single brush of her hand, the silent understanding in her eyes. It was nothing, and yet, it was everything. Later that night, the noise of the house softened. The television had gone quiet, my girlfriend had slipped upstairs, and the air outside had cooled with the promise of night. I stepped onto the porch, pretending I needed fresh air, but really just needing space from the laughter and chatter that had begun to feel heavy on my chest. That's when I saw her. She was leaning against the wooden railing, arms folded loosely, her face tilted up toward the dark sky. A single porch light above the door cast a soft glow across her features, leaving half her face in shadow and half kissed by pale yellow light. The sound of cicadas rose and fell in the distance, blending with the faint rustle of leaves. For a moment I just watched her unnoticed. She looked peaceful, but also lonely in a way that unsettled me. I cleared my throat, stepping closer. "Mind if I join you?" She turned, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Fresh air's free. No one owns it." I leaned against the railing a few feet away, the wood cool under my hands. We stood in silence for a while, both staring out into the yard where the garden's shadows blurred into darkness. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was something else. A waiting silence. Finally she spoke. "You know, sometimes I feel invisible." The words surprised me. I turned to look at her. "Invisible?" Her eyes stayed on the garden. "People always notice my sister. She's brighter than I am. Louder. She fills every room. And me." She let out a soft breath. "I've gotten used to being the background." Her voice carried no bitterness, just quiet resignation. That made it hit even harder. I shifted closer, just slightly, until our shoulders nearly aligned along the railing. "I don't think you're invisible," I said softly. She glanced at me then, her eyes catching the porch light, shimmering faintly. "Maybe not to you." The words sent a pulse through me I couldn't hide. My chest tightened, and I had to look down, tracing a grain in the wood with my thumb. After a pause, I admitted, "Sometimes I feel the same. Like I'll never measure up. Like I'm just, almost good enough." Her head tilted, studying me. And then, without hesitation, she reached out, her hand brushing against my forearm. Just the lightest touch, skin against skin, a whisper of warmth, but it anchored me in place. "I see you," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they struck deeper than I expected. The night air felt colder, the stars sharper, the world quieter. Her hand lingered a second longer, then slipped away, leaving behind the ghost of warmth. I should have stepped back. I should have made a joke to lighten the moment. But instead I stood frozen, caught between the weight of her honesty and the pull of something dangerous that had begun to grow between us. And in that silence I knew the line we were standing near, so thin, so easily crossed. The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight spilling in through the wide living room windows, warm and golden against the soft hum of everyday activity. My girlfriend had gone out for a morning errand, leaving the sister and me alone for the first time in hours. I tried to busy myself with tidying the kitchen, pretending not to notice her moving about, but my eyes kept finding her. She stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. The light caught the faint glimmer in her hair, turning strands of brown into threads of amber. She glanced at me over the rim of the mug she held, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked. That fleeting gaze carried weight, a quiet acknowledgement of something neither of us could yet name. "Here," she said softly, handing me a mug. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, lingering slightly longer than necessary. The warmth of her skin transferred to mine, and I felt a jolt I couldn't ignore. I set the cup down on the counter, my pulse picking up in a way that made the small, ordinary kitchen feel suddenly charged. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, tilting her head, watching me. The expression she wore was teasing, knowing, but calm, like someone testing a line and daring me to step closer. "Careful," she murmured, almost to herself, her lips curved in that quiet, confident smile that had been haunting my thoughts. "She'll never find out, if you're careful." The words sent a shiver down my spine. They weren't a command, not exactly. They were a promise, an invitation wrapped in laughter that didn't quite reach her eyes. My chest tightened, and for a moment I struggled with the thrill of being desired and the weight of guilt pressing in from every angle. I tried to respond with a casual laugh, but it came out shaky. I'll be careful," I said, my voice quieter than intended. She smiled again, that subtle curve of her lips that held 1,000 unspoken things, and leaned just slightly closer as if to read my thoughts. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something soft, floral, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the air around us feel thicker. My hands itched to reach for her, to touch her just to see if it was real, but I stopped myself, stepping back almost imperceptibly. The silence stretched, and in it, we both knew the tension had shifted. It wasn't playful anymore. It was charged, alive, yet restrained. Every movement she made, the way she tilted her head, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, shifted her weight, was magnified in my mind. I felt like a leaf caught in a warm current, drawn irresistibly toward her but anchored by the fear of what might follow. Finally, she broke the silence with a light laugh, slipping past me to put her mug in the sink. "Coffee's getting cold," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. But the electricity between us didn't dissipate. It lingered, silent and potent, marking the moment as one I knew I would replay in my mind for days, maybe weeks. I left the kitchen with my own mug, but her words, her gaze, and the brief warmth of her touch stayed with me, settling in my chest like a quiet, dangerous fire. That evening, the house had quieted down once more. My girlfriend had gone out with friends, leaving the two of us in the lingering warmth of the late summer air. She suggested we step into the garden to tend to the plants, and I followed, trying to convince myself it was purely practical, helping with watering, trimming, and weeding. But the moment we were alone among the soft scent of roses and freshly turned soil, the air between us changed. We moved side by side along the garden path, the light from a single lamp casting elongated shadows across the flower beds. She leaned over to snip a leaf, her hair falling forward and brushing against my arm. My hand twitched, tempted to steady her, but I caught myself. Just a brush, nothing more, yet it sent a pulse of warmth up my arm. She noticed my pause and smirked softly, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between us. Her eyes caught mine, glimmering faintly in the lamplight, and I saw a mix of curiosity and something deeper, desire, perhaps, but not the reckless kind. This was tempered with awareness, restraint, and intelligence. I told myself to stay focused, to keep things normal, but every casual touch, our shoulders brushing as we leaned over the same bush, our hands both reaching for a pruning tool, was magnified. Each movement, each glance, carried an unspoken weight. My pulse was loud in my ears, my chest tight. At one point, she leaned closer to inspect a bloom, and I caught a faint whiff of her perfume, soft and floral, mingling with the earthy scent of the garden. Her proximity was intoxicating, a dangerous mix of comfort and tension. I felt my hand twitch toward hers, but I stopped, pulling it back as if reality itself had grabbed me by the shoulder. "Careful there," she said, her voice low, almost teasing, as she adjusted the branch I was about to clip. Our hands brushed again, just lightly, but the touch lingered in my mind far longer than physically possible. The words she had whispered before echoed in my head. She'll never find out if you're careful. That memory was a spark, setting fire to the restraint I had so carefully maintained. I wanted to lean in, to see if the moment could exist beyond words, but every fiber of me knew it was wrong. The line between desire and betrayal had never felt more vivid. And then, she looked at me, eyes steady, unreadable, full of a quiet understanding, and I realized I could either step forward and cross that line or step back and preserve the bond that mattered most. I stepped back. Literally, physically, even as my heart ached. Her hand lingered near mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, almost imperceptibly, and then she moved on, tending to the roses again as if nothing had happened. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what had almost occurred. The garden smelled of roses and earth, but to me, it also smelled faintly of restraint, tension, and a desire that would have to remain unfulfilled. In that moment, I understood something about both of us. The connection was real, deep, and undeniable, but some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. The breaking point wasn't a kiss or a confession. It was the quiet acknowledgement of what we felt, tempered by the choice to step away. Later that evening, the house was quiet again. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the distant rustle of trees outside created a private world just for the two of us. I found her in the living room, sitting on the sofa with her hands folded loosely in her lap, the soft glow of a lamp casting golden light across her face. My chest tightened as I realized the weight of the silence between us. I had rehearsed words in my head countless times, and yet, as I approached, the first step felt heavy. I wasn't sure how to begin. Not with excuses. Not with jokes. Only the truth seemed adequate. I need to say something. I began, my voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet of the room. She tilted her head, studying me with that same calm, unreadable expression that had always unnerved and intrigued me. I can't, I continued, exhaling slowly. I can't do this. Not with you. Her brows rose slightly, curiosity and a hint of caution in her gaze. I moved closer, seating myself just a careful step away from her on the sofa, my hands resting on my knees. I care too much about her, I said, referring to my girlfriend. More than I probably realized. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you. I can't lie to myself about it anymore. The room seemed to hold its breath. She didn't speak, just let my words settle between us, her eyes glistening faintly in the lamplight. And then, softly, she shifted, leaning slightly toward me, not in invitation, but in understanding. Her hand came to rest lightly on my chest, just above my heart. Not pressing, not demanding, simply there, a quiet gesture of connection. I know, she said quietly, her voice carrying warmth, empathy, and a subtle sadness all at once. I feel it too. The honesty in her words struck me in a way nothing else had. For a moment, I felt the pull to reach out, to bridge the gap between desire and restraint. But as I looked at her, really looked, I realized that the truest form of connection didn't have to be physical. It could exist in honesty, in shared vulnerability, in the quiet acknowledgement of what could have been. Her fingers lingered on my chest for a heartbeat longer, and I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through the thin fabric of my shirt. It was comforting, grounding, intimate in a way that went beyond physical touch. I exhaled again, the tension that had coiled in my chest for weeks slowly loosening. We didn't speak for a while after that, but we didn't need to. The silence was filled with understanding, mutual respect, and a recognition of the bond we shared, deep, real, and unspoken. We had stepped to the edge of something forbidden and had chosen to step back together. That choice, I realized, made the connection even stronger. In that quiet living room, with just a soft lamp between us, I understood the beauty of restraint. Some stories, I thought, are meant to exist not in action, but in honesty. And for the first time, I felt at peace. The next morning, sunlight poured through the living room windows in broad, soft streaks, painting the walls with a warmth that felt almost like forgiveness. My girlfriend returned home, cheerful and unaware of the storm of emotions that had quietly raged the night before. She chatted about her morning, her plans for the day, completely unaware of the tension that had lingered between her sister and me. I smiled, laughed at the right moments, and followed her gaze when she glanced at her sister, who moved around the house with her usual quiet grace. But beneath the ordinary motions, the pouring of coffee, the rustle of papers, the laughter over a shared joke, I was acutely aware of the subtle, unspoken understanding that existed just beneath the surface between us. Her sister caught my eye across the room. For a brief moment, we shared a smile that needed no words. It was warm, familiar, and tinged with memory, the echo of the moments we had shared in silence, in tension, in honesty. She tilted her head slightly, a tiny gesture of acknowledgement. It was our way of saying that we both knew the truth of what we had felt, and yet we had respected the boundaries that mattered most. Later, as my girlfriend busied herself with a call in the kitchen, her sister came toward me, carrying a tray of fresh pastries. Our hands brushed lightly when she handed me a plate. The touch was fleeting, delicate, but I felt it deep in my chest, the warmth lingering like the memory of a whisper. "Thank you," I said softly, meeting her gaze. She smiled in that quiet, knowing way that had haunted my thoughts for weeks. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice carrying the soft strength and understanding I had come to admire so much. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned just a little closer to whisper, "Be good to her." The words were simple, but they carried everything we couldn't say out loud. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat, and gave a small, genuine smile. There was no longing, no guilt, not anymore. Only clarity, respect, and the quiet warmth of connection that had survived temptation without being tarnished by it. As my girlfriend returned to the room, laughing over something trivial, I felt the tension in my chest finally ease. Life resumed its rhythm, ordinary and comforting, and yet I carried a private knowledge of something extraordinary. The bond one shared with her sister had been tested, had grown stronger, and had been tempered by restraint. It existed now as a quiet, unspoken understanding, a tether between two people who had felt deeply but acted wisely. Before leaving the kitchen, her sister offered a soft, lingering hug, not close enough to spark desire, but just enough to convey warmth, respect, and the unshakable presence of what we had shared. Her cheek brushed mine lightly, the steady heartbeat beneath her hand imprinting a memory I knew I would carry quietly for a long time. I stepped back, exhaling slowly, and she gave a small nod, her eyes conveying everything words could not. And in that silent exchange I understood that some connections are meant to exist in restraint, in honesty, and in the unspoken truth of what might have been. The story didn't end in scandal, longing, or regret. It ended in quiet maturity, in warmth and emotional clarity, and in a bond that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. If you enjoyed this slow-burn story of temptation, restraint, and quiet romance, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that pull at your heartstrings. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection you couldn't act on? I'd love to hear your story.